Welcome everybody to Design Systems Are Coming. Is your team ready? Not to be confused with Game of Thrones, because winter is definitely not here. So we wanted to go through a number of things today of why are you here and what will you learn. So let's go through what we're going to cover. You probably work in a team that works with design systems or works on them, or you're just very curious about knowing all the details about working with design systems, and or you just sat through the last session, which definitely this dovetails off of. What's with all the hype around design systems? Is it a passing fad? It's not. These are here to stay, and they help a lot. You're going to see a lot of areas where things can improve. The session last talked about a lot of ROI that can be seen from design systems, and you'll see some of those efficiencies even stretching into your teams. You'll get to also kind of peek inside my mind, see all of the crazy things that I've been working on since I've started working with marketing and tech and everything way back when, over a decade ago. And this is how basically we track everything within our team. So who am I? I'm an RIT alumnus. I have my BS in marketing and mass media communication from RIT, as well as an MS in project management and marketing technology, which means I have done everything from design to development to project management and beyond. I actually technically started out as a ceramics major, but didn't work out. I've also been a certified Scrum Master since 2016, and that means that I just love solving problems. I'm a huge Agile evangelist, and so much so, RIT has hired me to be an adjunct faculty member developing Agile coursework for their new certification track. So I'm working on a lot of that, and it's been a lot of fun. I'm also a former program manager at Genuine, a digital agency here in Boston, as well as global systems manager, digital marketing at Puma. So yes, I did get free shoes. Yes, I still have a lot more. If you're a size 7, please let me know. Currently, I am a Bolt design system product owner at Pegasystems. I did also work with their engagement marketing team for a little while, so I've got a really good idea about what the marketing team needs and how those manifest themselves on our digital properties. And I'm also a first-time Design for Drupal speaker. Yay! Thanks. So basically, as you've been hearing probably all day, all year, etc., design systems are a thing now. And we have some highlights, so apologies if this is a tad remedial. But Nathan Curtis is pretty much, you can't start any talk about design systems without starting with some reference to Nathan Curtis. And he's widely regarded as a pioneer or father of design systems and has worked on some of the bigger name ones out there, such as Morningstar. He has a blog on Medium. Follow that there too. Highly suggest checking that one out. And he describes a design system as a style guide that is an artifact of the design process. A design system is a living, funded product with a roadmap and backlog serving an ecosystem. This is especially important because this carries through not just how you build everything, but how you manage everything. So we are going to cover the concept of a living style guide, but suffice to say right now, it's not enough, and it won't scale over time. It's great to start with, but you're going to need to do a lot more. Design system, when you actually build it out, will scale, whether it's 1 site, 5 sites, 10 sites, and only if you put some team organization in place, you'll be able to keep up the pace with adoption. That's one aspect of design systems we'll cover today. So what are they? What are design systems and what do they solve? We can explore a little bit more about it because Nathan Curtis classifies the artifacts of design and development into 3 buckets. You got almost always, which is where everyone pretty much starts. You get often and less often. So that means you can build a design system from a permutation of these elements. And he also organizes based off of versioning, which is achievable using dev tools like GitHub or even design dev tools like Abstract, which allow for that versioning component to be applied in design. As your design system matures, it will move along these columns to eventually have elements such as the less often column, which is pretty much where Bolt Design System is living within right now. And you can also think of this as like a checklist of sorts, things you'll need as you work on or work with design systems. So check out that last line in the graphic up there, serves product teams as customers and communities of contributors. Basically, this means that a product can serve a product, or in Pega's case, a property. It also takes a village to make sure that the design system helps everyone we serve. The living style guide won't cut it, since basically having the integrated designs and components update as you go will be crucial for your velocity and adoption across all of those who want to work with you. That doesn't mean that the living style guide isn't helpful, it's just not necessarily the context for what we need at the time. We just need to have that context change. So using it more as a reference, as a guide, as a way to onboard teams into what a design system is, that's when it definitely becomes in use. So if you want to learn more, definitely do a quick Google on design systems and a ton will pop up. I actually also have a link up there for a really good site that catalogs a lot of the design systems out there, and that's a great jump point. So what roles make up the team? And I promised we would talk about team organization, and here we are. Basically, these are the roles that you need, not necessarily representing numbers of people. Because in many cases, someone's going to play multiple hats. They're going to do multiple things. Right now, for instance, I am working as the product owner and Scrum Master. So that means in the Bolt design system, we have a lot of those types of roles as we're still filling out the team and deciding what we need. It's not always ideal, it definitely always doesn't scale, but you get a good understanding of what's needed and where you need to grow and when, and it happens. You also may be a visual designer who also does UX. You may also have one stakeholder, but you also may have 5 or 10. At its core, though, you need representation from design, development, QA management, and strategy. Absolutely crucial. And this is also, just to be clear, we don't necessarily mean here that you have to run Agile either. It does, though, increase your throughput, and we definitely recommend it. Not just designers and developers will contribute to your design system. You're going to have contributions from every one of these roles and more. So, is it a project or a product? How many of you have had a side project or a school assignment that turned into a full-fledged product? I mean, we're pretty much all there at one point. And this is going to be the same idea. Many design systems start out with a defined time-based effort that has a clear result, and you will go to that 1.0, and then what? Like, where do you go from there? Now you have to start working on 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, stretching into however long. Now, like, where will your product be in 3 years or 5 years? This now stretches it into that product territory. So anything that's going to be consistently iterated on and helps others is at its core a product. I'm sure all of you have had those moments where in a product you make a shortcut to save time and then just to hit that deadline, and then how many of you have had that decision come back to haunt you? I mean, yes, yeah, we've all done it. And it's like that special unique experience design that was part of a campaign that lasted only a month, that part of the hard-coded theme that needed to be rethought so that you could add translation capability. The list goes on and on. The whole point is the management and strategy coordination structure for these is the same for both. You need to be consistent, which means you also have to have a plan to follow to merge the project into a product so that you can future think a little better. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the field manual type stuff of how we get there with the product. Stakeholders, we love them, or we get really annoyed. Sometimes we get frustrated with their requests. Regardless, they're essential to the outcome of any project or product. And why? Because they have that power to make or break the work. If their request is no longer needed, they may pull the plug on your funding. But if you guys work together, you find some harmony in your joint efforts, and then their participation can actually lead to valuable insights and results. Stakeholders have different needs, not just with what they're requesting, but also how we communicate with them about the work and how it achieves their goals. We don't want to do more work. They don't want to do more work. Let's work together. Let's figure something out. So how do we do that for Pega? For Bolt, basically, we use the Agile process to our advantage, and we set some initial cadences of the strategic goals to allow our stakeholder approval of the roadmap output so that it aligns with senior leadership planning. It's a whole lot of buzzwords. But what it basically means is we got everyone on the same page. So if everyone's on the same page about what you're doing, if you're connecting things together, that timeline and the governance of those roadmaps become part of that team overall strategy for approaching the product or projects that it oversees. We also connected with our product management office to see whether or not they had any suggestions for us. And they did suggest one additional element to our structure, and that would be an executive sponsor. An executive sponsor would be elected by the group of stakeholders, which in our case are many, and they would help align the other stakeholders during key points in the strategy process so that we can fast track some formal approvals and provide final sign-off and overall product guidance for specific questions. From a strategic aspect, basically, we would say, all right, we're going to introduce this concept to all the stakeholders. They're going to agree to this. They're all going to agree to appoint someone as kind of like the grand poobah of all stakeholders, who's then going to come back to say, yes, we all decided we do want to go to this direction, especially if it's something that required a little give and take. All right, so we got it, right? Then what's our overall process? And I'm going to reiterate this a couple times because there's some slight nuances here. So we've identified our stakeholders and who needs to be involved and why, and then now what? So when I took my role on in September, this is what I defined as kind of like this is what we're going to do from September 2018 until when we finally ended that process and actually started working on our roadmap in January. So we wanted to create the product vision. We wanted to set some product goals, interview the stakeholders to align them to those and find out additional information, take all of that, do some additional research as a team, organize it in a way that makes sense, document it in a way that allows everyone to see the progression of the work, and then bring it back to the stakeholders for final approval, make sure everything's good to go, and then we can say, and begin. Let's just start running with it. And it's difficult sometimes to get through this because it is a whole lot of coordination, it's a whole lot of effort, but I do provide some tools in here to break it down. So to illustrate this a bit differently, what does every stakeholder need to know? What is the product roadmap? Is usually that question, like, well, where is this product going? So to answer that question, you need to take a top-down approach, which means stepping back a little bit. So we create that overall vision for the Bolt design system, and we distilled it down into a roadmap that's reviewed and approved by those stakeholders, and then planned with our team. So to walk you through that process again, we established the product vision, fast-track that into some goals. We then work it out into the product roadmap, which then makes it down into the release plan and backlog. So the center bottom circle is basically where many of you guys are going to live, the ones working on everything day to day that correspond to that release plan and backlog. And the best part is you can repeat this as many times as you want. And the whole point of this is not necessarily to overwhelm you guys with things that you may or may not be involved with. Like if you're only working on that bottom circle area, why should you care about the other things? Well, because they influence all the decisions you're going to make. If you don't know the vision, then you don't know whether or not this way of developing something or that way of designing something is going to work better to suit and actually achieve your end goal. So, focusing on our product, the Bolt design system, we did create a North Star. We created a vision. We sat in a room and we hemmed and hawed and we decided this was how we wanted to represent Bolt. It's a 100% open sourced product that is available to anyone in this room, anyone out there, but we wanted it to serve a couple different things for our potential end users. So that would be a vision to create a living unified design system to power best-of-class digital experiences. And we support this vision by designing the system in a way to deliver high-quality UI components, visual styles, tools, guidelines, and services that are easily accessible and usable by technical and non-technical users while reducing implementation time spent, cost to market, brand inconsistencies, and duplication of resources. Obviously, this is a vision statement. This isn't a mission statement that's like, very short and to the point. We needed to cover a lot of ground with this because this influences our entire year's worth of work and then future work as well. Next up, we had to decide what our vision goals would be. And originally, when we sat down to do this, we probably had about a dozen. But when you actually distill them down, we came into probably around 7. And that way we weren't working on something that was out of scope or out of approval. So the whole point here and the purpose is that any of these goals, in the order that we have them right now, at any time could shift. Tomorrow the fast code-free authoring experience become more important than maintained, stable, extendable platform. Everything here is important. Everyone can make a case for why everything should be number one. But what we wanted to capture was a point in time of something that meant the most for our product. And it's okay if you also don't have work that corresponds with every single one of these goals. Because we want to bucket the work in them, there may be some that are underrepresented or not represented at all. For instance, when we actually went through this exercise, we only had work in the first 4 buckets. That was it. You know, all the work that everyone wanted to work on, everything that we decided on, only fit those first 4 buckets. Rest we added along the way, and you can actually consider the presentations by me right now and Salem tomorrow to be part of goal number 7. And don't forget to check out his talk about front-end architecture scalability. Shameless plug. Thank you for laughing that much on that. I appreciate it. So, getting into the stakeholder interview, because not all of us know really how to talk to stakeholders or what we actually need in order to do our work. And we have to find out what they want. And so what I did was I created a deck that outlined what we were trying to achieve, read them through the vision, had them understand the different goals we were looking to put work into, and then asking them to do some homework beforehand, giving us some information so that we could then talk about it as a group in that interview. So I wanted to know things like, what events are you guys trying to support? Since we support digital marketing, they do a lot of events to engage potential customers. Are there any campaigns, whether they're social or webinar campaign or email campaigns, something that requires a digital experience for someone to come back to that could have a touch point with us? Are there any other initiatives? Maybe it's revamping the website or something to then add more storytelling. Whatever that is, we wanted to know about it. And we also wanted to know if there are any current pain points that they were experiencing. What's not ideal, or what would they love to change? And maybe even just pie in the sky, what do they want to see? Like, hey, if you could add anything to the design system, what would it be? Because chances are, even if we couldn't do the work, we could still help out in some way. Either we provide consultation guidance, like subject matter expertise, we work with whoever team is actually doing the work, but we could understand that and holistically build that into our product by understanding what they needed in the first place. And to drive the point home, record every session. Set up a WebEx recording, Camtasia something, get that audio, get that information, have someone taking notes. You're going to want to refer to that afterwards. You're going to want to also share it with your team. Don't hold it back on your hard drive or on your special shared folder on the network. This is something to be shared and reviewed, even with other stakeholders, so that they can see what everyone's pain points are. Because what you're going to start to find is that everyone starts saying some of the same things, and you want to group those together. Which comes us through mapping those observations to the goals. So the session framework that we followed, it allows us to kind of do some additional research and organization in order to distill the work down. So you feel compelled, obviously, to look at everything you already identified as your backlog. You may have them sitting around on Jira, Asana, whatever project management that you're using. You already know some of the stuff that you want to work on. They may bring stuff up that's very similar, so you can lump that all together and start organizing them. And if you have those, you can reorganize. When you're reorganizing and your reprioritization, you have to understand that the backlog is not the entire roadmap. It's just the items that you're going to include or archive. So basically, if the backlog item or any item doesn't fit within a goal, you should just place it at this time. Just place it aside to be reviewed later. Because during the course of this process, it's basically a development priority challenge where you're trying to understand what are the most things that are floating to the top. Those are the things that you then develop the priority around. And you wait to establish that priority until you have that full picture so that everything can go into the roadmap for that goal. So here's one of our templates. After every stakeholder meeting, we took their feedback and reviewed it, and then the first thing we did was assign this work to one of the goals, so insert one of those goals. And then if it couldn't be a part of the goal, we may bring it back to the stakeholder for additional clarification, or we may set it aside. And then we would look at what success looks like. In some cases, the stakeholder may have told us, everything takes forever for me to find. That's an anecdote that can be applied to some sort of metric that you can use to be reviewed against later. Even if it is qualitative instead of quantitative, it's still information. And you can also then create certain metrics out of that. Maybe, it takes forever for regression testing to be done. Well, maybe it's because you have one person doing it for the entire company. What if you automated some of that and then that reduces the time load? Like, you can start being creative with the solutions that provide a metric. You also want to make sure you're looking at what the impact is and where that impact will hit. Is it going to be your end user? Is it going to be a target customer? Understanding the needs assessment and maybe some existing feedback from current customers. Maybe the customer is an internal customer and you want to talk to content authors about certain things. That information can be pumped back into these templates. And then we also look at competition. Competition may not necessarily be your direct competitor. It may be a competitor in the space of a digital experience that you're trying to replicate or understand. So the competition aspect may also be something that gets kind of, from an internal aspect, kind of flipped into an owned ecosystem solution. Is someone at your company or someone else that you know already working on something that's very similar that you guys can collaborate on? Is that something that you guys can work with each other, or even just something that you find externally in an open source aspect that you can also pull in and review as a possible solution? And then it's also very important to understand the differentiators within this particular piece of work, because you're going to get a lot that looks very similar. So what makes this version of a button different than this version of a button? The breadth of this and understanding the breadth overall is going to give you a lot more information when you're actually reprioritizing the work. So with any template though, in actuality, when you're actually going through it, you may not have time to do everything. And with the best of intentions, you're going to fill out what you can. So here's a real example. And there's already a lot of information here. However, you notice there's no competitive analysis. There's no UX research. Why? Well, we didn't have those roles in our team yet. It wasn't something that we had access to. It wasn't something we had time for. And in this particular case, this was like a competitive analysis was not necessarily going to be the most appropriate route for this, since it was an internal concern with the development teams. So what we wanted to do, though, was also surface up some areas that came up during those stakeholder interviews, and that was timing. So one of the things that wasn't in that original template was when the stakeholder is thinking they're going to see this. That's a very important question to ask that we kind of forgot about in our first iteration of this template, is when are they thinking that they need this in order to satisfy that initiative or that event? They may say, I want to see the bulk of work done in Q1. Fantastic. Now you know how you can organize something. So you're not working on something that they're not expecting until Q4 in Q1. You can actually work on the things that take more priority and actually work on that get more value immediately. And you can also parallel path a lot of stuff too. So what did we do with everything else? After the initial roadmap sweep's complete, we did take a look at the items that weren't added into the roadmap, and we reviewed and assessed them again. So can we recycle this? Can this something that be maybe refactored a little bit to fit within one of the goals? If yes, how does it need to be changed? Fill that information out, add it to the roadmap. No. If not, then is it actually important or needed? And I would argue that every single thing that pops up is important or needed at one time. So in this case, we don't necessarily always kind of throw it in the trash bin. We may mostly archive something to be reassessed later. If you do this work quarterly, let's say you take 3 months, you work on a whole bunch of stuff, and you look at that old archive backlog with stuff that's not part of your roadmap, and then you find something in there that actually corresponds to some new request, it can mean you're not doing any rework. You're using the stuff that you already have in the back burner. It's just in another area until you're ready to look at it again. So we do like to use the archive function as opposed to the trash function. But in some cases, you guys have taken the product into a completely different direction, and some of those roadmap items are no longer needed, and so that would be definitely an advocate for the trash. From the team aspect of this, you have to have a place where you're actually organizing all the work. And we created some workspaces and organizations. So we used Confluence. It was a mishmash of one-off pages, no discernible structure. And after all the work we did on the roadmap, I wanted to make sure we had an area where we could do the work. So I added all of our roadmap items as pages with content into a 2019 workspace that was designed to be an easy way to find out more about everything we're going to be working on. It basically contains everything, and yes, it is super simplistic. It's just nested. It's nested underneath each of the goals. But what it allows us to see is just that high-level page that then can get built out with more information as we're working on it. That means you get the build out of those pages in the trees. Each roadmap element gets its own page and a corresponding label using semantic versioning, because we all know it scales, and links those tickets that correspond with that roadmap element. So we're going to start nesting a lot of these organization pieces, because what happens when you have a whole lot of tickets in the backlog? Not everything's labeled, not everyone knows what it is. There's a whole lot of organizational gotchas there that make it harder to understand where the priority level is in relation to something else, or even what something might belong to. So the stakeholders can also come into a Confluence page and comment, which is ultra important because you don't necessarily need them commenting on the specific Jira tickets. You want them commenting on the overarching thing that you're trying to achieve. And in this case, what we wanted to do was use it to spec out a lot of the things like critical work streams, additional information, stuff we already knew was out in the ecosystem, examples, designs, like the whole gamut. This would feed into unepic or epics that would then correspond into tickets. So you needed that kind of play space as you were doing your research, where to put all your information, because it will get lost in a ticket, I guarantee it. But finally, the ticket, so the label then references are added to the tickets. You can add one, many, and that's the beauty of something like a label. And they point back to that page. Every roadmap element may become an epic, but it's also made up of epics, so the labeling makes sense. And in this example here, you can see that semantic versioning of G1.8, which means the goal 1, maintained, stable, extendable platform, and the 8 corresponds with the Modal Confluence page, which was actually, the way I created these labels was, it was number 8 in the list. Very simple. Keep it simple. So we can get a little more nerdy. We use bug, code, review, task, story, and epic. The epic ends up being that overarching item with everything underneath it. And ask me after why we don't use subtasks. I'm happy to rant about how much I don't like them, but not now. All of the Bold design system components are listed and able to be added to a ticket. I just went in and added every single one. And as we create a new component actually developed, it gets a corresponding component in Jira. It just makes it easy. It also gives us a way then to see all of the tickets, let's say related to the form component. I can click that component, it just lists all the tickets that are related to it. So if you're working on a specific form component and you want to find all the tickets out there that are related to that, that's an easy way of doing it. Otherwise, who's been using Jira Search to find something? It doesn't always work. Because you're not necessarily writing your tickets in a way that allows you to actually search for things. So outside of the components that we use in our board for swim lanes, the epics that we're using not only as a classification but also for metadata, and then the labels, which is obviously another classification point, we're writing our tickets differently. So we're using what we're working on. So in this case, we're working on the modal. We use a qualifier. So that would be DOC for documentation, you see QA for quality assurance, code review, CR, FE, front end. You know, we're using some of those things to help us figure out what it is. So you're not just like when you're sprint planning, and then you click a ticket, then you have to open it, and then you have to read everything in the ticket to understand what's going on because the subject line was just, do this, or something to that effect. It just makes it a little easier for you guys to see exactly what's going on. So you could say, oh, here are my mobile tickets. You know, front end ones, this goes to those guys. And the QA team, they need this QA ticket because they need to write test cases. Documentation, well, let's have our designer work on some mock-ups that they can apply to our documentation page that we can then mock up elsewhere. Like, whatever that ends up being, you can kind of see it and work with it a lot easier. So, on the Bold Design System team, we hold 2 types of grooming meetings each sprint. And the goal is to have 1 dev grooming and 1 stakeholder dedicated time each week to talk through complex issues or new requests. In addition to this, the dev team holds regular dev huddles. to work through problems. So each of these meetings have different purposes then, and audiences, but the overall goal is communication. We need to have the dedicated time to work with the implementation teams, so the dev grooming helps a lot there. We also need to have architectural discussions in there that then feed into what we talk through with the stakeholders in that following meeting to gain approval on where we're moving forward. The feedback in both of those meetings is critical, absolutely critical, that we're maintaining that open line of communication. It also means that if something comes up, we can pivot really quickly and make that new thing a priority to discuss, to then add to the roadmap and add to the work that we're working on. So this reduces those fire drill moments that everyone has where everything is an urgent meeting on top of a heads up meeting. This protects the team's active development time as well because it time boxes those discussions because of the agile process, and you get as much done as you can on a regular basis. It also means the team has more time to work on things like beautiful design and experiences. So we've had a lot of really positive feedback on this structure, but we definitely want to make some changes moving forward to keep enhancing that communication stream. So this is a 2-week sprint for us. And you see that twice a week we get together for those grooming sessions. And I don't stop anyone from attending them. They're open. Everyone knows when they are. They're the same time every week, pretty much in the same space, even with the same meeting invite. Everyone knows that they can just drop in at any time. A stakeholder can attend a dev grooming and, vice versa. It doesn't matter to us. We just want to make sure that everyone has the chance to be heard and communicate. And we do want to time box those times in that Tuesday or Thursday because everyone can wait a day, or if there is a real emergency, we do have those kind of ad hoc meetings every so often. But this has greatly reduced those because they know they can maybe spend a little more time to gather information and then bring it to the team in an area where they know they can talk to everybody all at once. So we're taking an outside-in approach with our design system. We're kind of using the stakeholders to help inform what we're doing on their wants and needs, and we're normalizing them into the building blocks in our design system. This means we get robust components that always can help everybody. That's a little bit loaded because it's like there's the always and the everybody. We are trying to work through a lot of those challenges where something may work for one stakeholder and something may not work for that other stakeholder. But this is where having that executive sponsor comes in. This is where conversations between those stakeholders and meetings and keeping that communication open, where everyone can say, okay, fine, we can do it that way as long as we can maybe introduce this additional change in order to make it work better for me. So keeping that open definitely makes our design system more robust. But sometimes they don't know exactly what's in the design system and what's available, so how do we communicate that overall? And even if you have a great status board like Bolt does, where it reads the code and lets you know what is available for that component, it may not fully cover the breadth of what's available and what's left to do. Is a component ever really finished? Probably not. And plenty of more use cases are out there in the wild just waiting to be mocked up. We're going to go through a workflow. Tell me if you guys recognize this one. So you get a request, and it can seem like this. Make me this very specific thing. In this case, it's an image modal. The team complies. Everyone says, here you go. Let's make this super specific feature. You get that very nice image modal. The QA team checks it. Hey, works great. And then they hand it over to the stakeholders, and they're like, great, but can it do something completely different that may still be related, but they don't necessarily understand that what you just built doesn't necessarily duplicate the same way unless you're working at it from that kind of overarching concept of that component as the modal. So flip it to think a little bit more like a product where you're still getting that same request, make me an image modal. The product owner, in this case, what I'm doing is kind of thinking, okay, they want an image modal, but maybe do they want something a little more than that? Let's start looking at things, let's start researching, let's start seeing what's out there. So come to the conclusion, we need modals overall. We don't necessarily need one that holds an image, we need one that could hold anything. I mean, really, the sky's the limit. So I want to focus on the fact that we're doing this as a group. The designers are working with the UX designers who are working with the developers, we're all sitting there trying to figure this out. No one's working in a silo, or we try not to, because you're not necessarily going to come up with a result that can actually be developed in any way that's meaningful. So I want to keep working together. So as the team, they say, let's make some modals. They make those modals, looks and works great. The stakeholder says, it's everything I ever wanted. Ideal, right? And here's my meme here. What a deploy. Like, everything works, everything is what you wanted, everything, you know, every use case that they could ever think of is captured. Because you want to think with atomic design. So obviously Brad Frost is the pioneer of atomic design, and his book of same name is pretty much required reading on our team, and we love it for things like this. We conduct the interface inventory to look at everything out there, every property that we're working with, and even properties that we're not. We want to make sure that this interface inventory is understanding what's already out there, being its band-aid self, you know, solutions that have been created for those specific use cases, and they're just waiting for that brand new fancy thing from your design system to come in and replace it. You also get to see the content in context. Super important. You're mocking up, you're looking at things, you want to see how it's going to flow, how it's going to react, responsive, etc. You need this inventory in order to inform on a lot of those decisions about what kind of content's actually coming in there. In the absence of, you know, designs that are purely ethereal, that may or may not have a whole lot of substance to them, using an interface inventory allows you to kind of get a little bit more clarity into what you're looking to iterate on. And it's not easy what goes into a modal. So I'm going to go through what we've identified as part of the modal epic. And this is not just the design of the image pop-up, although that was the main use case. We definitely uncovered more across sites, and there were additional stakeholder requests. So there's other elements that make up the modal. You got animations, state management, testing, interaction with other components, component dependencies, schema and config options, data feeds, more state management, documentation of all of those elements, never forgetting accessibility, never forget accessibility. And then acceptance testing. Do the stakeholders love what you put together? Are they comfortable with it? Is QA ready and able to execute on the tests that are being defined or created? In some cases, your developers are writing a lot of those tests and handing them off. If that's the case, then you need to make sure that they actually work, they're running. And that's a whole lot of workflow in and of itself that's kind of outside of the design and the development, to be honest. And then publishing your release notes, announcing your feature on Twitter, on GitHub, anywhere else. I mean, there's a whole lot that goes into the fact that you just were asked to what? Create an image component, like create an image modal. That's one small thing, but look at all the work that's tied to it. And this doesn't necessarily happen just the once. This is going to be every component, so you can think of this like a checklist for every single component. Just insert use case here, insert new component name here. It's a lot of work in order to achieve a design system that has that strength to be used by multiple sites, strength to be used over and over and over again, and then be extended and future-proofed. Because without a lot of this, then you're running into, oops, I don't have enough tests. Oops, I don't know how I'm going to handle state management. I just built all of these components and I have no clue how to think about it. If you're thinking about it early, you can solve it early. So everyone wants to know, though, how do you estimate that? That was a whole lot of work. It was a whole lot of work. And so someone's saying, when's my image modal going to be done? You have to definitely think it in context with all the other work that's happening, and you don't necessarily have to, think of everything and estimate everything, but you have to have a rough understanding. So we use t-shirt sizing a lot for some of those big ticket items, and small, medium, large, extra large, and we assign a, whatever works for the team that we're talking with. So I'm just going to use days in this instance. So if you have small is a 1 to 2 day, medium is a 3 to 4 day level of work, large 5 to 7 day, and XL 7+. This means that you can say, hey, what you're asking for, we can achieve that in like a large aspect. It's going to take us probably like 5 to 7 days to work through from beginning to end to delivery. That doesn't necessarily represent entirely the work. It's the swag, it's the first initial blush estimate, but it does allow you to kind of think of it in context of all those other things that are going on. And it really just means that your story sizing is only as good as your agreed upon method with your stakeholders. Your stakeholders need to understand what your story method or what your estimating method means, and vice versa. You want to make sure that you're all talking the same language, because when you get to actually running the project, this is where I love the Fibonacci method. So where 1 is the least amount of effort and 13 is maximum effort. Deadpool joke? Yeah. Okay. So it's great for execution, but a lot of people only use it for hours, or represent hours, or some, sort of semblance of time based here. And if you could represent it with time in a fashion, you can sort of determine velocity, but that doesn't necessarily calculate a whole lot of other things that go into it. And velocity is a hard thing to pin down when you're also factoring in a lot of the other work. So what I like to do is translate this into something a little different. So the Fibonacci in practice is basically something I developed a couple years ago that basically applies the Fibonacci method, but also adds some areas of complexity. So that is task, risk level, and time estimate. So that means that if you are using an hour's worth for bug tickets, because that's what Jira says, they want bug tickets to be estimated in hours, not story points, you have to still think of time and the complexity in here. So we've got 1 being a task is quick and easy to do, very little time involved, it's a less than 2-hour task. You have a 2, which is task is easy to do, however tedious and probably manual, which means a 4 to 8 hour. Think of that as I have to edit every single node in the entire Drupal interface. Like, that's great. It takes a while. It's something that's tedious, but you can still do it. It just takes time. Task is 3. Then that means it's a bit more complex. No new code needed, but it takes some time to complete, and that's a 4 to 8 hour. A 5 means you have an even more complex task. Some new code is needed, and it takes time to complete, so then that's the 8 to 16 hour. And this is just the development time, not necessarily how long it takes for everything to go through the whole process, but you could, if you agreed upon, to also include that and change these metrics, which is what I did for Pega, was change these metrics to mean something to our stakeholders and mean something to the developers working on the project within our workflow. So if you are taking this and working on it as a team, you want to make sure that you're understanding that and keeping that first and foremost, and we do. We have it printed out and edited everywhere in our Scrum room, so basically during our dev sessions, grooming or anything else, they're all over the walls, and frequently someone will say, oh, I lost my printout, can I have, so that's pointing them back to that and re-downloading and printing it out again. But the whole point is to keep that agreed upon method with you. It doesn't matter what the method is, just agree on it and keep it with you. And if you're thinking about this from an implementation standpoint, when you're pairing those estimates with the work that's being done, with all the effort that you're putting in order to make a great design system, you also have to think about everyone else that's working with it too. So if you get front-end, design, QA, and UX all together, you get some sort of profit. And that profit means a great implementation of all of your culminated hard work. So the whole point is everyone has a hand in implementation. It's not just a handoff between front end to back end. It's not just a handoff between design to front end. It's not just a handoff between anyone and QA. If you're not working together, the implementation doesn't go smoothly. So over the past couple years, we've been trying many different ways to get that process of implementation correct, and we've made a lot of really great strides. This year, though, we were still having some problems with the implementation in Drupal. There was a lot of little idiosyncrasies that we were coming up with, and we were trying to figure out how we could circumvent those. So what we did was have a lot of conversations with those implementation teams and figured out, could we maybe do some small little things in order to make the process easier? So what we decided was we were going to insert additional rounds of QA before something got to a deployment, before something got to a new build. So we did some QA against what we were using as Pattern Lab in order to render the design system components. So we actually did QA on the old version to the new version and what it would look like before we actually commit that. And that allowed us to kind of catch a lot of things before it would get to the point where the implementation team would say, why didn't you catch this earlier? Well, now we're going to try. The same thing would happen is after it passes QA, we would then go through the process of QAing it from an integration standpoint, but we also understood that there may be some little bits of information that are getting missed along this pathway. So what we did was we tried to take everything that we learned in that design process, all those use cases that, that image modal, that came back to us and said, we just want that on the site. Well, then we started creating our own demo pages that actually listed all of that, those implementation details for that, and packaged them in an implementation ticket that is corresponded with all the other work that's labeled that can be cloned for any of the other implementation teams. So there's a ticket trail, there's a way that we can understand who's using a particular use case, as well as understand who we need to talk with and who we need to consult with as they're working on the work. It also means that the stakeholders understood where that is from beginning to end, because they're watching that use case get developed and they're watching that implementation go into another team's queue, and then they can then better understand when that feature is available. Almost done, guys, I promise. So in order to manage the work in the product setting, we had to understand how we would communicate the roadmap. And we're using it to show the roadmap in a high-level fashion for stakeholders, which means outside of that Confluence page is where we're doing the work. How are you showing that at the top level for someone that's in the C-suite that really just doesn't want to look at Jira? Because honestly, that's just, they never do. So you can achieve a lot of the connections with this within, let's say, Microsoft Project or Smartsheet. And basically the things I look for is what will integrate within our tech stack. So if you're using Jira and the solution integrates with Jira, then great, it might be a viable option. It really just comes down to what your team needs and what your team needs to report on, which will inform which solution you choose. And if you understand that, and we're using Product Plan, for instance, it's an online tool that we're able to then configure a lot of different things and show things in a lot of different ways. However, they have a lot of different types of templates. So we just decided to go with the product roadmap template that I broke out, much like our Jira board, of swim lanes that correspond with the goal, that input a lot of the information in a Gantt chart style that makes it very easy for us to drill into any of these items, show some of that additional information, jump into Jira if they really want to get into the nitty-gritty, because you will have stakeholders that do, I promise. It's fun, though, when they're getting involved with it, because then they mean they care. When they see a lot of this stuff, when they see a lot of the love and the information that's being shown off, like they see that you care about the work that they're asking you to do, that you care about it getting done, and then they care more. It's just a really nice kumbaya moment where everyone's just kind of happy and you're making great stuff. So what can you do now? And what's next for Pega? It's take it on in. It's a lot. It's a lot of work to manage anything, ever, from a project to a product or anything else. And you just have to talk to your team. What works within your workflow? What can you use? You may be a team of 1. You may be a team of 10. It doesn't matter. It's like understanding where you guys are in your journey and what you can use to move forward. And if you walk out of here and forget everything, just remember communication transparency. Everything has to be communicated. Don't hide anything. It's not worth it. It just means that, there might be some, questions about where everything's going, and then that leads to a lot of miscommunication. Just keep everything open, everything available, communicate it ad nauseum. Simplify where you can, and then future-proof using technologies and process that allows you to scale, think ahead, and go even further than just the next sprint or the next quarter, but think years ahead of where you are, and that's where we're hoping to go. So we want to be better at that life cycle of the Bolt design system. We want to make sure we're staying true to our vision that we defined, and we want to get everyone excited about what's to come. So, questions? Thank you. Any? Or did I cover everything? Go ahead.
I'm just curious how big your team is.
So we have 3 active designers with it, or 3 active interactive designers. So we have Salem here, front-end architect. We also have Dan Morse. Is he in here? There he is, another front-end developer, as well as Mike, who is not in this room, but he's also one of our development team. We also work with QA that is shared throughout Pega. And then we have a couple of team members that are kind of stretched between the Drupal implementation and come into our team and do some ad hoc consultation, as well as some work within it. So we're not really a big team at all. So it's like 5. But we are working to try and get more, but it also means that we want to work with more people that are already at Pega that are working with our design system to add to the team, as opposed to let's hire more people. It's just trying to work with the resources that we have.
When you said 3 designers and
3 interactive like developers, yeah.
We're all front-end developers. Mike's a designer developer. And we have we have a visual designer on our team.
Yep, Alex right there. She's our visual designer. So, and we also work with other visual designers within the other properties as well. Like they're not necessarily sitting on our team. They're contributing. They're stakeholders from other areas. So we're seeing, okay, this is how Pega.com wants to do an image modal. This is how the community site wants to do an image modal. Like they're all talking together and trying to work out into something that we can normalize. And that's basically Alex's job, is to normalize a lot of that into the design system.
and their job is to work on it. They're
Yes.
working on other projects too.
Well, we work on everything.
We represent the work that other properties need,
Yes.
but really, like, there's 4 people, 4 people.
3 or 4 people dedicated to it, yeah.
5, including Margo, that are 100%. Everything that we're producing is for the design system, even though we're solving real things that other people do on other properties.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. The Drupal team, it's her web property that they're managing.
Any other questions?
How do you align the timeline with other projects and stakeholder projects?
That is a constant bit of fun. Really what I do is during the stakeholder meetings, we show them at a glance what we're hoping to achieve in the quarter. So I'm building a quarter out with a lot of the work that relates to the roadmap. So if we said, hey, you guys really wanted conditional components in Q3, are you comfortable with us delivering that at the end of Q3 or at the beginning of Q3? And then they say, you know what, we really need in the beginning because we have this initiative that's at the end. So we try to have a lot of those conversations, and we do them weekly. So this stuff changes every week. So if we say, hey, we need to work on something now, we'll kick things out, we communicate that. So we do try and have representation from the teams that we are working with, the additional teams that we're working with in those meetings, so that they can give us a heads up on those. So it is a lot of coordination. Tia, they're one of the Scrum Masters. She works on a bunch of the properties, and we sit there and we hem and haw over exactly what we're going to achieve and when things are delivered, and then when things need to be started. So it's a collaborative effort and constant. Anything else? Okay.
I have one more specific question. So when you want like a new feature or component, what's the decision point between with there are so many design systems out there?
Mm-hmm.
What's the decision point borrowing from something else versus inventing your own?
A lot of it starts with the design and the use case. So the stakeholders will work with design in order to figure out a rough idea of what they want. What we do is then look around to see what's out there, and we see if that matches a lot of the elements within the design, and then it's a conversation back and forth like, hey, you guys had everything that all these other, not necessarily design systems, but other sites and in the ecosystems have, except this one little thing. Do you want that, or do you not want that? Like, is there a reason? So it's a lot of conversations back and forth, and that's why the communication part is so... Go ahead, Sam.
It's both. So sometimes we might take something that's an off-the-shelf library. We'll still package it up because we're supporting the demos, the documentation, the schemas, the testing coverage, all the other infrastructure to support the design system. Even if it's literally like an off-the-shelf accordion library because it has great accessibility and great community support. The off-the-shelf stuff is still fully supported, and then the custom stuff where the solution needs to be more tailored.
Yes.
Build it in-house, or if the component's simple enough, like our button component, we just build it ourselves, and we still have that same sort of, documentation, schemas, all that stuff.
But it still requires a lot of communication.
Yeah.
Anything else?
And more on the schema stuff tomorrow.
Yeah, go to his talk for more schema fun. Okay, great. All right, well, thank you guys.